They told my son to step out of the family photo because he wasn't really one of us. They served him dinner on a plastic plate, while his cousins got silverware. They smiled to my face, then made my child feel like an intruder in his own home. And the worst part? I let it happen for far too long. Now, let me tell you how it all began. My name is Rachel Moore. I'm 34 years old, and I work as an HR manager at a mid-sized logistics company just outside of Denver, Colorado. I'm also a mother. I don't say that casually. I earned that title the hard way. My son, Logan, is 7 years old, bright, kind, and far too perceptive for his age. He lost his father when he was just 2. I lost my husband, my partner, the man I thought I would grow old with. Grief doesn't always look like sobbing in a dark room. Sometimes it looks like showing up to parent-teacher conferences with a smile. Even when you're falling apart, it looks like teaching your child how to tie his shoes and hiding in the bathroom afterwards so he doesn't see you cry. But we made it, Logan and I. We built something solid together, a quiet life, a safe one. Then I met Daniel Blake. He wasn't flashy or poetic, but he was consistent, patient, the kind of man who took the time to learn Logan's bedtime routine before he ever kissed me. When we got married 2 years ago, I genuinely believed we were stepping into a bigger, warmer family. Daniel's parents, Walter and Janice Blake, had been polite, even welcoming during our engagement. But politeness has a way of hiding its teeth. At first, I chalked it up to generational differences. Janice didn't refer to Logan as her grandson, just the boy. Walter rarely spoke to him at all. During family dinners, Logan's place at the table always seemed temporary. A folding chair, a plastic cup. Once, I noticed everyone else had cloth napkins. Logan had a paper towel. Subtle things. Things you can ignore if you try hard enough. Daniel, bless him, didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't want to. They're trying, he'd say. It's just new for them. And I wanted to believe that I really did. Because the alternative that they simply didn't see my son as worthy of belonging was too painful to accept. It wasn't until Logan asked me, after one Sunday lunch at their house, "Mom, am I allowed to be in family pictures too?" that something inside me cracked. I laughed it off in front of him. But that night, I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how long I had been mistaking tolerance for love. This is not the story of a perfect family falling apart. It's the story of a mother realizing that keeping the peace was costing her child more than she ever imagined. And from that moment on, I decided peace wasn't worth it. Not if it meant watching my son slowly disappear inside a house that was supposed to protect him. Because if I didn't act soon, Logan wouldn't just feel like an outsider. He'd start to believe he was one, and that was something I could never allow, not again. Not ever. The signs had always been there. I just didn't want to believe them. Like the first time Logan came home from Daniel's parents' house and asked why his cup was plastic when everyone else had glass. I told him it was probably just a mix-up, that maybe they'd run out. I didn't want to think too hard about it, because the truth felt too ugly. Then came the birthday party for Daniel's niece. Janice had gone all out decorations, personalized gift bags, even cupcakes with each child's name iced on top. Logan's was missing. When I quietly pulled Janice aside to ask, she said, "Oh, I thought he wouldn't come. It's not really his side of the family." It was a punch in the gut, disguised as a smile. Daniel brushed it off. "Again, they're adjusting," he said. "Give it time." But I was starting to realize time wasn't what they needed. They needed conviction and they didn't have it. I began to notice the way Walter never spoke directly to Logan. He'd ask Daniel, "Is the boy ready? Or is he coming with us?" Never a Logan. "Would you like to come?" Just a third-person shadow treatment like Logan wasn't quite present. Or welcome. There was also the seating chart incident. Thanksgiving dinner. Janice had printed place cards' elegant script, gold-trimmed. Logan's name wasn't there. When I asked, she handed me a folded napkin and said, "He can sit wherever." He ended up squeezed at the corner of the kids' table with a plastic fork and no one talking to him. That night, Logan asked me if we'd brought our own family plates. When I asked why, he shrugged and said, "Because ours were different." I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled and said I'd get him extra pie. The moment that really started unraveling me, though, was something so small it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. Daniel and I had printed family photos for a scrapbook project Logan had at school. One of them was from a family barbecue at the Blake's house. Logan was missing from the group shot. I remembered that moment vividly. Logan had been standing right beside Daniel's nephew when we lined up for the picture. But in the printed photo, he was gone. I asked Janice about it. She blinked, sipped her tea, and said, "Oh, that must have been one of the shots where he stepped out. Only he hadn't." I remembered. Daniel remembered. Logan had stood quietly, smiling like he belonged. When I showed the picture to Logan, his face didn't change much. Just a flicker like something inside him had quietly confirmed a suspicion he was too young to name. "I guess I didn't fit," he said. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying all the moments I had dismissed, minimized, softened for Daniel's sake or maybe for mine, and I realized something painful. This wasn't a series of oversights. It was a pattern, a deliberate erasure of my son from the story they were trying to tell. And the longer I let it go unchallenged, the more that story would become reality. I wasn't just protecting Logan's feelings anymore. I was fighting for his place in the world, starting with the one we called family. The breaking point came one weekend when I had to fly out for a last-minute HR conference in Chicago. Daniel had a work commitment out of town too, a 3-day field assessment on a site with no family accommodations. We discussed our options. A babysitter felt too cold for Logan. My sister was out of state, and Daniel's parents, unfortunately, were the most convenient choice. They had offered before, insisted. Even said they'd be happy to take Logan for a few days. We'll treat him like one of our own, Janice had said with a thin smile. I should have known better. Logan didn't complain when I told him the plan. He nodded slowly and said, "Okay, Mom," in that quiet voice that always makes me want to hold him tighter. I packed his overnight bag, included his sketchbook, his stuffed dinosaur, and enough snacks to cover a long weekend. I left Friday morning and tried to focus on my meetings. I called the first night. Janice answered and said, "Everything's fine." Logan didn't come to the phone. "He's in bed early, tired from school," she explained. Saturday evening, I got a single text from Daniel. "Mom says Logan's doing great, but something felt off." I couldn't sleep. I came back a day early. On Sunday afternoon, I didn't text ahead. I just drove straight from the airport to the Blakes' house, my chest tight the whole way. When I walked in, the house was quiet, too quiet. Then I heard the sound faint, repetitive, a scrubbing noise. I followed it to the back patio, and there he was, Logan, kneeling on the cement, scrubbing the tiles with a stiff brush. His small hands were raw and pink. His knees were dusty. His shirt smeared. A bucket of soapy water sat beside him, cold and gray. My heart stopped. "Logan," I said. He startled and looked up. His eyes widened, then dropped. "I'm sorry." "Mom," he said immediately. "I spilled lemonade. Grandma said I had to clean it. I didn't mean to waste anything." "Where is she?" I asked, barely holding my voice steady. "Inside, watching TV." I walked past him into the kitchen. Janice and Walter were seated comfortably, the television humming, a bowl of chips between them. They looked up in surprise. "You're back early," Janice said. "Everything all right?" I didn't answer. I just stared. "You left a mess outside," I said slowly. "A 7-year-old is out there on his knees because he spilled lemonade." Walter shrugged. "He should learn consequences." I turned to Janice. "Would you have made Ethan do that?" She flinched. That was all the answer I needed. I walked back outside and gently pulled Logan to his feet. He didn't protest. He didn't ask questions. He just clung to me, like he had been waiting for the rescue he wasn't sure would come. "In the car," he whispered. "Please don't make me go back there." I squeezed his hand. "You won't." We drove home in silence. That night, Logan fell asleep curled beside me on the couch. I watched him breathe, watched his fingers twitch in sleep, and thought about how I had left him with people who saw him as disposable. And I realized something. It wasn't that they didn't love him. It's that they didn't even try, and I had let them. That was the last night I would ever make that mistake. I didn't confront them right away. Not because I was unsure, but because I needed to see how deep the rot went. Daniel got home late Sunday night. I told him everything. His face paled, but his words stumbled. I'm sure Mom didn't mean it that way. She made our son scrub a patio in silence while she watched TV. I said, "Tell me what part of that is easy to misunderstand." He rubbed his temples. "They just don't know how to connect with him. It's not ideal, but, he didn't finish the sentence. I didn't argue further, not that night. Instead, I opened a new folder on my computer titled, "For Logan." In it, I started logging everything, the things I had dismissed before. The things I couldn't forget now. Photos, dates, quotes. I wasn't preparing for a war. I was building a record, a history of harm written in small, insidious gestures. Over the next few weeks, I became more observant. I watched how Janice sent out birthday invitations to Daniel's cousins but left Logan off the email chain. I noted how Walter always addressed Ethan, their real grandson, with warmth and jokes, while Logan got silent nods or the occasional cold correction. At one family brunch, I caught Janice pulling Daniel aside. I was close enough to hear her whisper, "Rachel needs to stop expecting everyone to treat that boy like he's blood. It's making people uncomfortable." That boy, not Logan, not your grandson, just that boy. Daniel didn't push back. He looked exhausted, trapped. That night, I asked him plainly, "Do you believe Logan is your son?" His eyes welled up. "Of course I do." "Then act like it." I wasn't angry when I said it. I was empty, past fury, past hurt. Just a quiet clarity that had taken too long to find. That week, I scheduled a meeting with a child therapist. I wanted a professional evaluation not just for Logan, but for me. I needed to know if I was projecting my own pain onto situations, I needed the truth. The sessions were gentle at first. Logan didn't say much, but his drawings spoke volumes. Pictures of families with one member off to the side, stick figures with sad faces behind glass. In one session, he drew himself standing in the rain while the others had umbrellas. When the therapist asked why, Logan simply said, "They didn't have one for me." That night, I cried in the shower until my throat burned. This wasn't my imagination. This was neglect by 1,000 paper cuts, and I'd let too many slide. From that point on, I stopped making excuses. I stopped asking Logan to be patient or give them time. Instead, I told him, "You belong. Full stop." And then I started acting like it. No more invitations accepted out of politeness. No more dropped hints. I began setting boundaries not loudly, not cruelly, but with intention. If someone didn't want to include my son, then they didn't get access to me either. Not anymore, because love doesn't look like silence. Love looks like showing up, again and again, even when it's inconvenient. And if Daniel's family couldn't love Logan loudly like he deserved, then they weren't going to have quiet access to his life anymore. I was done trading my child's dignity for anyone's comfort. There's a moment, a quiet, crushing kind of moment when suspicion becomes certainty. And once you see the truth that clearly, you can't unsee it. For me, it came 2 weeks after Logan started therapy. We were sitting in the car after school, idling in the pickup lane. He was humming quietly, flipping through a book, when he said, almost absent-mindedly, "Did you know Grandma told me not to use the last name Blake at school?" I turned to him. "She said what?" He shrugged. "She said it might confuse people, since I don't really belong to that name." I gripped the steering wheel so tightly I felt my knuckles ache. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was calculated. That was erasure planted carefully in a child's mind like a weed that spreads if left alone. That night, I checked Logan's class directory. His name was listed as Logan Moore, not Logan Blake, the legal name we'd given him after the wedding and Daniel's official guardianship. I hadn't authorized that change. Neither had Daniel. The school secretary confirmed it had been updated by a relative with prior emergency contact clearance, Janice. Daniel was stunned when I told him, not angry, just quiet. Still, he didn't offer a defense. Not this time. And then came the final confirmation. Logan's therapist, Dr. Patel, scheduled a check-in with me alone. She was gentle, but direct. "Rachel," she said, "I don't want to alarm you, but Logan's drawings are consistently centering around themes of exclusion, abandonment, and social rejection. He sees himself as an outsider, not just at school or in peer groups, but in his own family." I nodded slowly, already feeling the heat rise behind my eyes. She continued, "He talks about the invisible line at Grandma's house, how Ethan gets to sit at the big table, but Logan doesn't. How his gifts are different. How he's told to be quiet when company comes. These are patterns," deep, repeated, and internalized. I felt sick. I had been fighting shadows, giving too much credit to doubt. But this was no longer about interpretation. This was confirmed. Clinical emotional injury? When I came home that night, I sat down with Daniel. "I'm not asking anymore." I told him, "I'm telling you we are setting hard boundaries. Starting now." He didn't argue. He looked like a man who had finally stepped out of fog and realized he was already halfway off the cliff. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. "Support me, unconditionally, in public, in front of your parents, and we're going to document everything from here on." I updated the For Logan folder, screenshots, audio recordings, every text, every side comment from Janice. The paper trail was growing and I wasn't collecting it out of paranoia. I was collecting it because I was preparing to protect Logan with everything I had, even if it meant legal distance from Daniel's parents. A few days later, Logan brought home a handmade card from therapy. On the front was a stick figure standing alone, with the words, "I am enough." Inside, he'd written, "I don't want to be someone's maybe. I want to be someone's always." I pinned it to the fridge, and that night, I realized something profound. I wasn't just confronting a toxic dynamic. I was undoing a quiet campaign to convince my son that he was a guest in his own family. No more. This wasn't a war. It was a rescue, and I wasn't leaving without him. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual and sat at the kitchen table in the quiet. I looked around at the space we called home, the fridge covered in Logan's drawings, the breakfast bowls still stacked from last night, the bookshelf where we kept the stories he loved most. And I thought, this is the world he sees me build. Every single day, my son watches what I tolerate. And from now on, I was going to make sure he only ever saw me build a world that refused to erase him one boundary, one decision, one unwavering truth at a time. Drawing boundaries is easy on paper. In real life, it triggers alarms in all the people who were benefiting from your silence. It started with a phone call. Janice, cheerful on the surface, called to check in the morning after Daniel and I skipped a Blake family dinner. "We missed you all last night," she said, sugar in her tone. "The roast wasn't the same without your little one." I didn't entertain the game. We'll be sitting out family gatherings for a while, I said plainly, until we're sure Logan is safe and treated with respect. There was a beat of silence on the line. Then the mask cracked. Well, I think you're overreacting, Rachel. You've always been a little sensitive. And frankly, dragging a child into adult tensions, it's not healthy. Neither is making a child feel unwanted in his own family, I said, then hung up. That was the first ripple. The second came through Daniel's aunt, a text full of veiled concern. Family's all we've got, sweetheart. Don't let a little parenting clash tear everyone apart. Then came the escalation. Logan's spot at the community swim club, one Janice had helped coordinate through a personal connection, was suddenly not available anymore. When I asked about it, the coordinator looked uncomfortable and said, there was a mix-up with registration. I'm sorry, but Ethan's name was still on the list. Daniel noticed the shifts too. At work, his father stopped returning calls about shared business contacts. One of his cousins, who worked in the city council office, withdrew a referral he'd promised Daniel for a municipal engineering contract. They're freezing us out, Daniel said one night, staring at his phone. I nodded. That's what people do when you stop playing along, he sighed. You think I made a mistake? Waiting this long. I think it took as long as it took, I said. But we're here now, and we're not going back. Still, the pressure tightened. Janice left a voicemail. I'm just saying, if you keep pushing us away, don't expect us to be around when things get hard. Families support each other, Rachel, not punish each other for being imperfect. I didn't call back, but I saved the message. The irony wasn't lost on me that the people who had spent years excluding my son were now calling me the divider. But I had learned something critical. When you take your power back, those who misused it will always call you the problem. One night, I found Logan in bed, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. He looked up at me and asked, Am I in trouble with Grandma? No, baby, I said, curling beside him. You're not in trouble. You're just not invisible anymore. He nodded slowly. I don't like when people pretend I'm not there. Me neither, I whispered. And that became my compass. Every action, every conversation, every decision moving forward was filtered through one question. Does this make Logan feel seen? Because if the answer was no, I wasn't interested. We were building a new definition of family, one where silence wasn't mistaken for love, one where loyalty wasn't a weapon, one where Logan didn't have to earn belonging. And it was only just beginning. Even Daniel, who had spent so long trying to bridge both sides, began to shift. He no longer defended them in conversation. He no longer hesitated when Logan needed affirmation. And in those moments, I didn't just see my husband. I saw an ally. Because sometimes the hardest thing to protect a child from isn't a stranger. It's a grandparent with a soft voice and a sharpened smile. And once you know that, you stop hoping they'll change. You start preparing for who you're going to be without them. The deeper I looked, the more I realized I hadn't been seeing the full picture. Logan had always been a quiet kid, thoughtful, observant, a little too self-contained for someone his age. I used to think it was just his nature. But now, with everything unraveling, I began to wonder how much of that stillness had been trained into him. One evening after school, I found him sitting in the hallway with his sketchbook. He didn't hear me at first, and when he finally looked up, there was a flash of guilt in his eyes, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. What are you drawing? I asked. Sliding down next to him, he turned the page slowly. It was a scene of two children playing in a yard. One was smiling. The other, smaller, standing outside a fence, had no face. Who's that? I asked gently. He shrugged. Just someone who wasn't invited. I didn't press. I just wrapped an arm around him and said, You're always invited here. Always. But the image haunted me. The next day, I reached out to Daniel's cousin, Elise, the only one in the family who had ever really tried to talk to Logan at gatherings. She was a school counselor, soft-spoken but sharp-eyed. I asked if we could meet for coffee. She showed up with a worried look and a folder in her bag. I've been meaning to talk to you, she said. I just didn't know how. My stomach tightened. Talk to me about what? Elise slid the folder across the table. Inside were copies of emails ones Janice had sent to other family members. One read, Rachel's boy is sweet, but it's best we don't blur lines. Ethan is the only real heir in this family. Another, we'll include Logan when it's just Daniel and Rachel. But not at legacy events. Let's keep the bloodline intact where it matters. I felt the heat crawl up my neck. The room went blurry. She sent these? I asked. Elise nodded. She didn't think I'd disagree. I think she assumed I'd understand. I stared at the papers. The polite, composed cruelty written in tidy sentences. This is coordinated, I said. They didn't just ignore him. They erased him on purpose. Elise nodded. I'm sorry. Rachel. I didn't know it was this deep until I saw how Logan started shrinking back every time someone mentioned family. She hesitated. I want to help. Those 4 words cracked something open in me, because until then, I had felt alone in this. Me and Daniel, barely holding the line while the rest of the family chipped away at it from every angle. But now I had a witness, a voice from within the circle saying, "This isn't right." That night, I showed Daniel the emails. He sat in stunned silence, then stood up, walked out to the garage, and stayed there for over an hour. When he came back in, he looked older and clearer. "I'm done protecting them," he said. "Whatever we need to do next, I'm in." It felt like we were crossing a threshold. No more blurred lines, no more gray area. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional harm, and harm has consequences. We updated the For Logan folder with the emails. I reached out to our attorney and began drafting a legal notice that would formally restrict Janice and Walter from unsupervised contact. We didn't send it yet, but it was ready. We also spoke to Dr. E. Patel, Logan's therapist, about preparing him for conversations around truth, identity, and selective relationships. She offered to guide us through a safe, child-centered disclosure process, not of every ugly detail, but of enough truth that Logan would never again blame himself. Because he'd done nothing wrong. He just happened to be born into a family where love had conditions and he was the exception. But not in this house, not in mine. Because here, love didn't come with asterisks. And family wasn't earned, it was honored. Some people think retaliation is loud slamming doors, yelling matches, lawsuits, but the most effective kind of retaliation, it's quiet, thoughtful, surgical. It's saying no without explanation. It's creating a plan so clean that no one sees it coming until it's already done. That's what I started doing. First, I scheduled a full legal consultation, not just to review visitation boundaries, but to restructure our family's legal documents. Logan was already Daniel's son on paper, adopted through legal guardianship after our marriage. But we'd never finalized estate documents, custodial protections, or power of attorney stipulations. That changed. I had our lawyer file a set of amendments. If anything ever happened to us, Logan's care would fall to a neutral third party, my sister, not the Blakes. We also added a stipulation that Janice and Walter Blake were to have no legal or decision-making power in Logan's life. None. Not now. Not ever. Daniel signed everything without hesitation. Then, we met with Dr. Patel again, this time with Logan in the room. We didn't tell him every ugly detail, but we told him enough. Enough to let him know he wasn't imagining the way he was treated. Enough to remind him that what he felt was real, and that we saw it. We believed it, and it wasn't his job to fix it. His shoulders relaxed, just slightly. The next step was school. I met with Logan's teachers and the principal, explained the situation briefly and firmly. They were supportive and horrified. The school counselor offered to meet with Logan twice a week in addition to his regular sessions. We added her contact to our circle of safety at home. We built what we called Logan's Map, a visual board of people who were safe, consistent, and kind. We included pictures, notes, voice messages. If someone made Logan feel small, they didn't make the map. Guess who didn't appear? Janice and Walter's absence was loud and intentional, but I wasn't done. I wrote a letter carefully worded, emotionally restrained, and mailed it directly to them. It read, "You will no longer be included in Logan's life. This is not a punishment. This is a boundary created in response to repeated, deliberate harm. Any future communication must go through our attorney. We wish you peace, and we expect silence." I never got a reply. Daniel received a short email. "Your wife has poisoned your son against us. You'll regret letting her make these choices." He didn't respond. He blocked the sender. In the quiet that followed, something strange happened. Peace. Not dramatic, not celebratory, just space. The absence of tension, the removal of dread. Logan began sleeping better, laughing more. He started inviting friends over. He started correcting adults when they used the wrong last name. "It's Blake. Actually," he'd say, with quiet confidence. Daniel and I started having conversations about what kind of family we wanted to build. Not just the one we were trying to survive. We created new rituals. Pizza every Friday night. A gratitude jar by the dinner table. Journaling on Sundays. None of it fancy. All of it real. And every week, the For Logan folder grew not with evidence of pain, but with proof of protection. Copies of his artwork. Notes from teachers. Audio clips of bedtime stories. A new archive. Written not in defense, but in love. We weren't reacting anymore. We were rewriting the rules. And the first rule, no one gets to make my son feel unwanted, not even his own blood. The final blow wasn't a scream. It was a quiet, deliberate undoing. It began with a story. I posted on a parenting forum anonymously. No names, no locations, just the story of a boy who was being excluded by the very people who were supposed to protect him. I detailed the emotional erasure, the subtle cruelty disguised as tradition, the way love was withheld like a prize to be earned. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of comments, hundreds of private messages, parents, teachers, even adult children who had lived through the same kind of quiet rejection. People who had been Logan's themselves. People who had chosen to become Rachel's. The post went viral within days. That's when the local parenting magazine reached out. They wanted to republish the story under my name. I declined, but I gave them permission to share the story more broadly. Still anonymously, Janice saw it. I know she did. Because she sent an email to Daniel 3 days later. The story your wife told is cruel and dishonest. We have never harmed that boy. If she doesn't take it down, there will be consequences. Daniel didn't even blink. He forwarded the email to our attorney, then deleted it. The consequences did come, but not the kind she threatened. People started asking questions. A few of Janice's longtime friends quietly distanced themselves. Her book club disbanded. A committee she volunteered on requested she step down due to ongoing personal matters. It wasn't revenge, it was accountability. Because when you spend years pretending to be gracious while quietly cutting others down, eventually someone holds up a mirror. And sometimes that mirror is your daughter-in-law with a folder labeled for Logan. Meanwhile, Logan blossomed. He was sleeping through the night, eating better, more talkative. His therapist noted a visible shift, his posture straighter, his eye contact stronger. He laughed more. He came home from school one day and said, "Mom, guess what? I told my teacher that I'm not just Daniel's stepson. I'm his real son." I hugged him so tightly he squeaked. That weekend, Daniel and I made one more decision. We updated our will. We added a clause that Logan was to inherit our home, our assets, our names without contest. Anyone who attempted to challenge that clause would be legally removed from the will altogether. No loopholes, no what-ifs, just a clear, final declaration. Logan is ours, and if anyone tried to say otherwise, the law would say they were no one. The final act came with a knock on the door. Not from Janice, not from Walter, from Ethan, Daniel's nephew, 14, shy, clearly nervous. "Can I talk to Logan?" he asked. I let them go into the backyard. After an hour, Logan came back inside with a soft smile. Ethan said sorry. "Did you believe him?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah." He didn't know. He thought I didn't like them because that's what Grandma told him. I swallowed the anger that rose in my chest. She lied. He asked. "Yes," I said. "But now you know the truth. That's what matters." He nodded again. It feels better. And somehow, it did. Because we hadn't just defended Logan. We'd changed the narrative. We let the truth breathe. And sometimes, that's the sharpest weapon you can ever wield. Later that night, I sat down and wrote Logan a letter. Not to give now, but to seal and keep for when he was older. Old enough to understand the full weight of what we'd done. I told him about the choices we made. About how hard it was to draw the line. About how drawing that line cost us relationships but saved him. I told him he was never too much. Never inconvenient. Never a burden to be tolerated. That he was our center. Our reason. Our future. I folded the letter and placed it in the For Logan folder. In a section I labeled Legacy, because what we were doing wasn't just damage control. It was inheritance. Not of money, not of property, but of truth, of safety, of the message that he never had to shrink to make room for someone else's comfort. And for the first time in months, I went to bed not feeling tense but proud, because we hadn't waited for permission. We had claimed our right to rewrite the ending, and that ending began here. There was no grand confrontation, no dramatic apology at a family gathering, no weeping phone calls in the middle of the night. What came instead was silence, and that, I realized, was its own kind of ending. Janice and Walter didn't try to reach out again. There were no birthday cards, no last-minute holiday gestures. They vanished not with remorse, but with resentment, and I let them, because not all absences are losses. Some are blessings wrapped in clarity. One Sunday afternoon, I was cleaning out the hallway closet when I found an old family album one Janice had given us years ago. It was filled with pictures of Daniel as a child, his siblings, holidays, baby showers, page after page of smiles frozen in time. Logan was nowhere in it. I set the album aside. Then I walked into Logan's room, where he was sprawled on the floor building a Lego spaceship. "Hey," I said, "want to make our own album?" He looked up, eyes bright. "With just us." "With us," I said, "and everyone who loves you, right?" That afternoon, we printed photos, silly ones, serious ones, some blurry, all real. We filled a blank scrapbook with drawings, captions, little notes. Daniel added a page too, one that just read, "You made me a father. I'll spend my life earning that." When we were done, Logan flipped through the pages and smiled. "This is better," he said. And it was weeks later. Dr. Patel remarked on the difference. Logan was opening up more, asking questions, advocating for himself, rebuilding not just trust but identity. She said, "Whatever you're doing, it's working." But it wasn't just what we were doing, it was what we'd stopped accepting. The turning point hadn't been rage. It had been refusal. Refusal to let politeness override protection. Refusal to explain ourselves to people committed to misunderstanding. Refusal to let bloodline define love. In a world where so many families bury harm under tradition, we had chosen something different. Truth. And peace, the kind that doesn't come from quiet, but from boundaries. Logan would grow up knowing he was chosen, defended, and unconditionally loved. That was the legacy we were building, and in that, We were finally free. That weekend, we held a small cookout in our backyard. Just us, Elise, her partner, a few of Logan's school friends, and our neighbor from down the street who always brought extra marshmallows. We grilled hot dogs, played music, watched Logan run through the sprinkler laughing so hard he hiccuped. At one point, Elise leaned over and said, "You didn't just protect your son, Rachel. You built him a village." And I realized she was right. It wasn't just about who we shut out. It was about who we let in. Because family isn't who shares your name. It's who shares your fight, your laughter, your table, and your vision for what love should look like. That night, as we watched the last of the fireworks fade behind the trees, Logan rested his head on my shoulder and whispered, "This feels like forever." And for the first time, I could answer without hesitation. It had been months of peace, real, sustaining peace. Then came the letter, a cream-colored envelope, no return address. The handwriting was unmistakable. Janice's. Careful and looping, I stood at the kitchen counter, holding it between my fingers like it might burn. Daniel came up behind me. "You don't have to open it." But I did. Inside was a single page. No apology, no explanation, just a line. "We'd like to meet, just to talk. We're ready to listen." Signed, Mom and Dad. I handed it to Daniel, who read it twice. His jaw tightened, but he didn't say a word. "What do you think?" I asked. He shook his head. "I think it's too late." But something about the note stuck with me. Not because I believed they had changed, I didn't, but because I knew Logan would ask one day, and I wanted to have an answer ready that wouldn't taste like bitterness. So we discussed it. With Dr. Patel, with Elise, with Logan gently, and in the end, I responded. I wrote, "We will not meet. Logan is thriving. He has been through enough. If you want to repair anything, start by acknowledging what you did in writing, directly to him. No justifications, no conditions, just truth." A week passed. Then 2, no reply. And that, somehow, was more powerful than any confrontation, because it told me everything I needed to know. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted access. They wanted their version of family, the one where Logan stayed quiet and invisible back. And they weren't going to get it. We kept the letter, filed it in the back of the For Logan folder, as a reminder that sometimes silence isn't the absence of love. It's the absence of power, and that is something we would never give them again. That night, I found myself rereading their note. I truly tried to imagine they meant it, that behind the careful script, there was regret. That behind the phrase "ready to listen" lay actual change. But then I remembered the voicemail, the birthday parties, the plastic forks, the erased photos, the way Logan flinched whenever someone mentioned family gatherings. Regret, if it ever came, should have arrived years ago, not now. When the consequences had finally landed, Dr. Patel had once told me, closure doesn't always come from others. Sometimes it's the door you close yourself. So I folded the letter back into its envelope and wrote a short note across the front. No response necessary. Then I sealed it in the folder. Because we didn't need their meeting. We didn't need their rewrite. We had our own version now, and it was enough. The letter stayed in the drawer. But the question it raised lingered. Would we ever open the door again? Daniel and I talked late into the night, not in anger, not in pain, but with the kind of exhausted clarity that only comes after surviving something together. "They'll never say sorry," he said. "I know, but what if one day Logan wants to see them?" That was the question I couldn't shake. Not because I wanted reunion, but because I didn't want resentment from Logan toward us. So we brought it to Dr. Patel. She nodded thoughtfully. "There's a difference between protecting your child and controlling their healing. The key is to leave the door closed but unlocked. If Logan wants to open it one day, on his terms, you'll be there to guide him through." That felt right. So that's what we did. We didn't reach out. We didn't respond again, but we stopped speaking of Janice and Walter like they were villains, not to excuse what they'd done, but to model what peace could sound like. And we prepared. We created a safe space in case the day came: letters, context, evidence, all in the folder, ready to answer Logan's questions when he asked. Not to shape his view, but to give him clarity when he needed it. In the meantime, we chose to focus on what we had: a child who smiled more often, a marriage that had grown roots, not cracks, a home filled with rituals that felt like healing. One evening, Logan asked, "Do you think Grandma ever thinks about me?" I didn't lie. I think she does, but thinking and changing are 2 different things. He nodded slowly. "Then I'm okay." And with that, the question closed itself. Not forever, maybe, but long enough to let us breathe. And sometimes, that's the bravest kind of decision, the one you make not out of fear or anger, but out of love. The kind that says, not now, and maybe not ever, but always on your side. That was where we stood, with Logan. Always. That night, Daniel kissed Logan goodnight and lingered at the doorframe. When he came back downstairs, his eyes were glassy. "He called me Dad without hesitating tonight," he said. No step, no pause. Just, "Dad." I smiled. "He means it. Daniel sat beside me and took my hand. I didn't protect him soon enough. You're protecting him now, I said. That's what matters. He nodded. It's strange. I feel like we lost a family, but I also feel like we built one stronger, smaller, but real, and he was right. We didn't need noise to prove we were okay. We had laughter. We had bedtime stories. We had Logan's steady, healing joy. That was our answer. Not revenge, not reunion, just love, showing up day after day with no conditions. And that was enough. The first snowfall came early that year. Logan stood by the window, nose pressed to the glass, watching as the flakes dusted the backyard like powdered sugar. I was in the kitchen, making cocoa, when he called out, "Can we build a snowman later?" "Of course," I said. "A big one," he nodded. With a scarf and everything. When we stepped outside, Logan ran ahead, boots crunching over fresh snow. Daniel followed behind, carrying a box of old winter gear. I trailed them both, watching as my two favorite people in the world began to roll their first snowball. The wind was crisp, but the air felt light. I glanced toward the old garden fence, the one that once marked the edge of our yard, and metaphorically, the limit of our peace. Beyond it lay everything we'd shed. Expectations, silence. The illusion of belonging that demanded Logan stay small. We didn't look back there anymore. We had everything we needed on this side. As the snowman took shape, Logan turned to me and said, "Can we give him a name?" "Sure." I laughed. "What do you want to call him?" He thought for a second. "Hope." My chest tightened, in the best way. Later, as we sipped cocoa and watched the snowman stand tall under the setting sun, I pulled out the scrapbook we'd started. Logan leaned against my shoulder, flipping through pages covered in stickers, notes, and scribbles. On the last page, there was a photo of the three of us laughing on the couch, arms tangled, eyes bright. Logan looked up at me. "This is my favorite picture. Mine too." There was no caption beneath it. There didn't need to be, because this was the final image not of a fight, or a loss, or a battle won, but of a family, quiet and whole. And sometimes, that's the most radical thing of all. Just this, a child who knows they're loved, a mother who stopped asking for permission, a father who finally chose, and a snowman named Hope, standing watch as the world softened around them, still and safe. That night, after Logan had gone to bed, Daniel and I sat on the porch wrapped in a shared blanket, watching snow gather on the railing. "I used to think family was something you inherited," he said quietly. "Now I know it's something you build." I reached for his hand. "And protect every single day." He nodded. "We didn't get everything right." "No," I said, "but we got the part that mattered." Behind us, the scrapbook lay open on the coffee table, its pages fluttering gently from the warm air vent. Like the story inside was still breathing. Maybe it was, because this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning honest, imperfect, and entirely ours.